This is the second part of Confused Choosing Career, an excerpt from The Defining Decade: Why Your Twenties Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now by Meg Jay. The Customized Life. To accept life in its disjointed pieces is an adult experience of freedom, but still, these pieces must lodge and embed themselves somewhere, hopefully in a place that allows them to grow and endure. Richard Sennett, sociologist. A person's identity is not to be found in behavior, but in the capacity to keep a particular narrative going. Anthony Giddens, sociologist. Sessions with Ian did not go smoothly. Like other 20 somethings raised on the promise of doing anything, Ian flinched when faced with the here and now. A life of infinite possibilities had felt like a disorienting and overwhelming burden, but it had also been a liberating fantasy. The concept of anything sounded limitless and exciting, while in comparison, digital design sounded limiting and boring. When we talked about actually moving toward a career in digital design, Ayan bagged. He did not want to just have some office job and work 9 to 5 like everyone else. Ayan was on a sneaky search for glory. He suffered less from the tyranny of the should than he did from the tyranny of the should not. His life was not about getting A's or even the need to realize his potential, at least not in any mainstream way. Conventionality wasn't his niche. Ayan's search for glory was the lure of being different, so he displayed what has been called a common symptom of youth: the dread of doing what has been done before. If he ever chose something to do for work, he did not want it to be some same old everyday thing. His life could be unique. I did not completely disagree. Distinctiveness is a fundamental part of identity. We develop a clearer sense of ourselves by firming up the boundaries between ourselves and others. I am who I am because of how I am different from those around me. There is a point to my life because it cannot be carried out in exactly the same way by any other person. Differentness is part of what makes us who we are, but it gives our lives meanings. But different is simple, like the easiest way to explain black is to call it the opposite of white. Often, the first thing we know about ourselves is not what we are, it's what we are not. We mark ourselves as not this or not that, the way Ian was quick to say he did not want to sit at the same desk all day. But self definition cannot end there. An identity or a career cannot be built around what you don't want. We have to shift from a negative identity or a sense of what I'm not to a positive one or a sense of what I am. This takes courage. A braver form of self definition dares to be affirmative. Ian needed to move from talking about what he was not going to do to talking about what he was going to do. Being against something is easy, I said. What are you for? To Ian, claiming was confirming. By starting a career, he imagined he was agreeing to decades of the status quo. Saying yes to one concrete thing felt like saying no to an interesting or limitless life. In fact, it is the other way round. If Ian did not say yes to something, his life was going to become unremarkable and limited. When I sat with Ayan, I sometimes thought about a 31-year-old woman I worked with who told me she had spent her 20s changing her hair color as often as she changed jobs. Bright purple when answering phones at a spa, white blonde when temping, deep red when mystery shopping, chestnut brown when working in a preschool. When she became engaged, she confided that she planned to quit her job. She said, I cannot stand my boss right now. I have got a wedding and a honeymoon to plan, and soon I'll have babies and I'll get to work, think about something else for a while. When I asked how her fiance, an elementary school teacher, felt about being the sole breadwinner for a soon to be growing family, she shrugged nervously. And this client made me think of the 39-year-old female who told me, at this point in my life, if I'm going to work and pay for childcare and be away from my kids all day, I need the work to be interesting and well paid. But I can't get that sort of job. In my 20s, I did not really deal with what I was going to do about work. In my 30s, I had kids, we need the money, and I have to work. But you would not believe the jobs I can't even get. I go for jobs and people just look at me like, why have not you done something by now? I wish someone had told me to think about my resume a long time ago. Or I thought about the 44-year-old male client with a new baby who said to me, "You know, if I had a decent psychologist in my 20s, I probably could have started my career before I was 35 and had a family before I was in my 40s. If you're still doing this in your 20 years, I'm sending my son to you." When I asked what he would like me to say to his son, my client replied that you can't pull some great career out of a hat in your 30s. You have got to start in your 20s. With these lines in mind, over the next many months, my sessions with Ian went more or less this way. I would say, "You need to claim something," and Ian would say, "But claiming feels like losing everything else." Or Ian would say, "I don't want to settle for something ordinary," and I would say, "I'm not talking about settling, I'm talking about starting." 20 somethings who don't get started wind up with blank resumes and out of touch lives only to settle far more down the road. What's so original about that? After the conversations, Ian would look at me sideways. Then he would roll up his pant leg and head out the door towards his bike. Ian and I needed to come together. The ocean had not worked for me. The jar of jam had not worked for him. We needed a metaphor we could agree on. After many amicably strained sessions, Ian came rushing in from the bus, venting about waiting for a bike part in the mail. In an ongoing effort to back off, I made small talk. I asked why he could not get the part he needed at the cycle shop where he worked. This is when Ayan told me he rode a custom bike and the part he needed had been special ordered. I was curious. I knew Ayan's bike was his primary mode of transportation, but I also knew he was not a road biker or a mountain biker. I asked why he had a custom bike. He explained he did not necessarily need one, but he felt this sort of bike was a better reflection of what he wanted to convey to the world. Now we were on to something. I asked Ayan what a custom bike said about him compared to a mass produced one he could buy anywhere, one that might be even easier to maintain. He said the bike represented his feelings, that he wanted to be the product of different parts, someone who cannot be defined by a label. Ayan's desire for a custom bike was a sincere reflection of what he wanted for himself. He wanted his life to be singular and complex and great, but the fact that he was looking for a solution at a store said a lot about how his 20s were coming along. Ayan had the right idea but found it easier to customize a bike than a life. In business and culture, we have moved from mass production to mass customization. Progress used to mean turning out the most identical widgets at the least expense for the highest profit. Now we expect to be able to tailor goods and services to suit our wants and needs. Personal computers are self specified and truly personal. Apps and design your own smartphone cases make each phone unique. A custom shirt company encourages customers to be their own brand. With e commerce and peer to peer marketing, we have set aside one size fits all in favor of a market of one. Companies and marketers have tapped into the innovative life that many, like Ayan, want but are not sure how to get. Let them eat lifestyle, it is said. Ayan needed to transfer what he knew about building bikes to putting together the pieces of life. I asked Ayan how a custom bike is built. He said he went to a bike store where he was fitted for a frame and wheels. The frame was made based on his measurements and riding needs. Then he specified some other preferences for parts and received a bike of his liking. As he gradually outfitted his bike, it became more functional and distinctive. This took time and money, but Ayan enjoyed the pursuit. The bike represented something important. It was all his creation. So, a customized bike fits you, I said. Yeah. And it's unique, I said. Yeah. It feels authentic and different, even limitless in a way because you can keep changing it over time. Yeah, exactly. But you started with some standard parts. You did not literally reinvent the wheel. No, he said, smiling. I did not. I asked Ayan to consider that maybe that's what an authentic, unique life is. In the 21st century, careers and lives don't roll off an assembly line. We have to put together the pieces ourselves. Ayan's life could be personalized and changeable, but it was going to take some time and effort. He would probably need to start with some common paths. Having an uncommon life was not going to come from resisting these choices, it was going to come from making these choices. Same as the bike. Ayan could imagine building a life one job or one piece of capital at a time. It seemed less confirming and less terrifying than feeling like his next move would decide the only way his life was going to be forever. So, what are you going to build on? I asked. You mean with work? Ayan asked. You need to work. Your life needs to work. Different parts of me want to do different things. Right, I understand, I said. So, which part do you start with? Ayan said. I don't know. You don't? I asked. What about digital design? I've actually been applying for some jobs like that recently, he said sheepishly. But I'm not even getting interviews. I thought I would sail right through this once I decided what to do. A job in an office is not looking so bad, especially now that I realize I can't even get one. I listened while Ayan thought. I still think about the company in DC, he finally said. You know, the one we talked about with the digital design apprentice program? But I'd never get in, obviously. That does not seem obvious to me. Tell me about your application, I said. After serving on several admissions and hiring committees, I know a fair amount about why one 20 something is chosen over another for some coveted spot. I have read through hundreds of application packets and seen how numbers fade into background while artful cover letters and essays stand out in relief. I have watched one applicant get into graduate school at one place while another wind up somewhere else, all because of how a 15-minute interview felt to the person in charge. One thing this has taught me is that a good story goes further in the 20 something years than perhaps at any other time in life. College is done and resumes are fledgling. So the personal narrative is one of the few things currently under control. As a 20 something, life is still more about potential than proof. Those who can tell a good story about who they are and what they want leap over those who cannot. Think about the number of applications that hiring managers and graduate programs receive. Countless pieces of paper with lines of capital such as Biology Major 3.9, University of Tennessee, Piedeman Community College, GMAT 720, Basketball Team 2.9. Campus Tour Guides, French Minor, Art History Major, University of Washington, Dean's List, GRE 650. Amid the details, a protagonist needs to appear. A good story should take shape, otherwise, resumes are just lists and lists are not compelling. But what is a good story? If the first step in establishing a professional identity is claiming our interests and talents, then the next step is claiming a story about our interests and talents. A narrative we can take with us to interviews and coffee dates. Whether you are a therapist or an interviewer, a story that balances complexity and cohesion is frankly diagnostic. Stories that sound too simple seem inexperienced and lacking. But stories that sound too complicated imply a sort of internal disorganization that employers simply don't want. I asked Ayan what he said about himself when he last applied to the apprenticeship in design. He said he wrote something about staying up all night in high school, putting together the yearbook layout, and said the essay was postmodern and smart, but he had a difficult time explaining it to me. I suggested he try again. Then he go for something coherent and smart, something with an obvious narrative arc, and resisted this idea, imagining a boring essay that mirrored his resume. This was a problem because while schools and companies want originality and creativity, they want communication and reasoning even more. No matter what company or program one applies to, a sort of game goes on. Interviewers want to hear a reasonable story about the past, present, and the future. How does what you did before relate to what you want to do now, and how might that get you to what you want to do next? Everyone realizes most applicants don't actually know what their careers will look like. Even the ones who think they do often change their minds. As a human resource executive told me, I don't expect people to say it's their dream to work here forever. I roll my eyes at that. No one knows where they will be in 5 years. Still, the burden is on the applicants to show that working here makes sense beyond the person just wanting a job or the building being 2 blocks from the apartment. Life does not need to be linear, but it does, as this executive said, need to make sense. So life does not need to be linear, but needs to make sense. Ayan, you're doing it again, I said. You are muddling your story because you do not want to commit to anything, much less to anything that makes sense, that makes you sound cagey or chautic. No one will hire you with a story like that. But I don't want to pin myself down, he said. To what? Your story is not a contract. You would not be asked to sign it in blood. It's an introduction. Reluctantly, Ayan created a sharper narrative, one that started with his early interest in drawing. He pulled together his relevant experiences in architecture and cognitive science classes and a bit about his work. In the opening sentence of the new essay, Ayan recalled a time from childhood when he carried around a little spiral flip notebook because he liked to make small abstract pictures for his parents and siblings. His family called him Mr. Logo. With the same capital and a better story, Ayan went to work at the company in DC. A few years later, when he was at another choice point in his life, he wrote this. When I made the decision to come to DC, I worried that by making the choice, I was closing all the other doors open to me at that moment. But it was sort of liberating to make a choice about something. Finally, and if anything, this job has just opened more doors for me. Now I feel really confident that I will have several iterations of my career, or at least time for several iterations, and that I'll be able to do other things in life. For a long time, it was such a relief to have this job. I felt like I could just live my life and not worry about direction. Worries that immobilized me in the years after I graduated. Now I am at a point where I don't want to continue in my current position, and I am pissed. It is hard to think all over again about what the next step is, but it is easier now because I know from experience that I have to take action, that debating is not going to get me anywhere. Sometimes making choices feels like planning for my life in a way that seems boring. Sometimes making choices to pursue things that seem like good fits or that match my interests seems boring simply because it makes no sense. I find myself wanting to go off in an unexpected direction. Arabic, Cambodia. I know this is a sort of crazy impulse. I know that the way to live a good life is to pursue things that are not only interesting to you, but that make sense. Above all else in my life, I feared being ordinary. Now I guess you could say I had a revelation of the day to day. I finally got it. There's a reason everybody in the world lives this way, or at least starts out this way, because this is how it is done. Ayan was right. This is how it is done. This is how it starts. Claiming a career or getting a good job is not the end, it is the beginning. And then there is still a lot more to know and a lot more to do. Thank you.